Wish you were one of those influencers with raving fans who binge on your every word, consume all your content, buy everything you have to sell, and demand even more? Then stay tuned while Authority Magazine columnist and BuzzFeed contributor Tracy Hazard shares strategies, tips, and tactics from top videocasters, podcasters, authors, and social influencers on creating that bingeable factor. Now, let's join Tracy as she explores how to rise above all the digital noise with the binge factor.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Feed Your Brand Center of Influence. I'm Tracy Hazard, and I have a couple of new podcasters to bring you. Courageous Wellness Podcast. Doesn't that sound good? Courageous Wellness. I love that. So I have Erica Stein and Aly French, and they have been doing this since last year. So they've had a whole year of podcasting under their belt. That's awesome. And they decided to start this podcast to really raise awareness and de-stigmatize what's going on in conversations in the wellness space. So after experiencing a cancer diagnosis in her 20s, Aly and Erica, who sustained a 50-pound weight loss and self-love journey herself, decided to create this platform to interview real people about their personal journeys in health and wellness. So they cover physical wellness, emotional wellness, spiritual wellness, and they hear courageous stories and focus on why it's so important to share these stories. I love that they're celebrating experiences and life lessons of their guests, as well as drawing lessons from them, their own courageousness as well. So I'm so excited to bring you both of them. And I have to say, Aly, a cancer diagnosis in your 20s, that horrifies me. I have a daughter in her 20s, and that would just be so shocking to me as a parent and life-altering. I can't imagine what it was like for you.
It was definitely a surprise for sure. And I was 29 at the time, so kind of a little bit on the later side of the 20s. But regardless, young, feeling healthy. I'm a performer by trade, so I do a lot of singing and physical live shows, theater. So kind of kept myself in pretty good health, I thought. I was used to taking care of my body. And I had a bruise basically that wasn't going away on my back. And so eventually, after multiple doctors not knowing what it was and a really long time to actually quite get a diagnosis, I found out I had a rare tumor that starts in the skin but grows down. And it's called DFSP, dermatofibroma sarcoma. It was a type of sarcoma. And I was really fortunate because I just had to do a few surgeries, but it definitely changed my perspective on my health, my life, my invincibility.
I think it probably takes a big hit there.
Exactly. So it definitely just a big shift in my mindset having gone through that experience.
Yeah. So sustaining a weight loss, on the other hand, was it a battle for you constantly?
Yeah. So I always carried extra weight, and food has always been so emotional for me, as I know it is for so many people. And for better or for worse, it was a good day or a bad day. The reward in my family was always food, nurturing with food. And so, I always carried extra weight, but I definitely hit my highest weight in my early 20s. And I would always try to lose it, right? If I would lose this weight, then I would be XYZ, right? I'd be happy. I'd have relationships, whatever. I never was able to lose the weight because it was always about the physical weight and always dealing with the way what was happening in my emotional life was manifesting, right? So what was going on the inside was manifesting on the outside. So my weight loss, and I think why I was able to sustain it now for 6 years, is because it really began from a self-love journey, even more than a weight loss journey. When I really started dealing with this part of myself and really going through I'm going to love and treasure myself exactly as I am, exactly at this weight, exactly how I look, that's actually when the weight just started falling off. And yes, of course, I started exercising, but I was only exercising 2 days a week. And I guess I started eating differently. That's what's so hard when I originally started talking about my weight loss journey to people, because, I lost 50 pounds in about a year. And everyone would be like, what are you doing? What happened? And I practice Buddhism. That's how Aly and I met. But it really started from this daily chant and this daily practice of, I love myself, I treasure myself, I value myself as I am in this body. And the weight fell off.
So you've got shocking, jolting changes and long-term changes. So I love that you guys bring such different perspectives to it. And after having listened to some of your episodes, you see those interesting perspectives and interplay. You obviously are good friends. Even you can just feel it. And so whether you started as friends before or it's become closer over time, let's talk a little bit about that. But I think that that's what's key about your show. That's what's making your show unique, is the fact that you two are bringing such different perspectives.
Yeah, I think that's something that we fortunately have. And it was part of the impetus for creating the show, is that we had vastly different experiences that related to our own personal wellness, mine from a more medical perspective, and Erica's from a sort of an emotional perspective. But of course, there are physical elements to hers and there are deeply emotional elements to mine. And we realized we have these stories that we knew each other, but we didn't know the depths of the stories prior to creating this platform. And it was when we started really talking about and sharing our own stories with each other in that way that we realized, so many people have stories to tell. And people can really gain a lot from hearing other people's experiences, because it doesn't feel like you're alone in what you're experiencing, that it's just a part of the human condition.
Yeah. So is that why you decided to start the podcast a year ago?
Yeah. So Aly and I, like you mentioned, our friendship, we met this year. It'll be 5 years ago that we've been friends, but we weren't the closest of friends. Like we weren't best friends, but we knew each other. We were social friends. I did know Aly when she was experiencing her cancer diagnosis. But like Aly said, she met me after I lost the majority of my weight. So she had no idea that I had this weight loss journey that was so emotional. And I didn't know, like she said, the intricacies of her cancer diagnosis, recovery, the emotional component that took on her. So about a year ago, Aly actually returned from Japan. She was doing a show. She mentioned she's a performer in Japan. And she came home and we just started spending all this time together. We were sharing more deeply about ourselves. And we've learned too, right? The importance of being vulnerable, the importance of having courageous conversations and courageous dialogue. So we were just doing that in our friendship. And yeah, as Aly mentioned, we were like, other people have these stories too. Let's create a platform for people to feel less alone and share them.
So when you started it, was it easy? Was it hard? Like, what horrible or funny things happened to you when you first started?
Yeah. Well, we have learned so much as we've gone, still continue to, but it was so funny. We say sometimes we had just enough sort of blind ignorance going into it that it wasn't a barrier to entry, right? Like we did our research and we knew a little bit about podcasting, but in a way, I think also our lack of knowledge in this space, and there's such a sort of saturation of podcasts these days, it sort of didn't let us, or it helped us not limit ourselves. We're just like, let's do this. We don't really know what we're doing, but we're going to figure it out as we go. That was actually a big lesson. Not waiting, like we can't, it's funny, we can't listen to the earliest episodes because they're so rough. But you know what? We didn't wait till we felt it was perfect to start it. We just started and we allowed ourselves to refine, and we continue to allow ourselves to refine and learn and have sound issues and all the things that come up when you're podcasting. But allow that to be a part of our journey and not feel like there's this sort of perfect product prior to just doing it.
Right. Yeah. I think that's so important that you guys have found that. And you've taken on the challenge. So I just want to mention this because I'm watching you do this. There's no video to this. You're hearing it, but they're doing that's interesting. And this is something because Tom and I just recorded an episode about co-hosting, because Tom and I are co-hosts. We've been co-hosting together for 5 years and we've done almost 1,000 episodes together. And it's hard. It is not the easiest thing in the world to co-host because you step over each other, you trip on each other's voices, you want to support each other, but that's actually overtalk, right? And so, so so you learn to nod a lot. You learn to smile a lot at the other. You learn to give thumbs up and weird things like that. But what they're doing is they're sitting side by side and they're passing the microphone back to each other, which prevents, and they said that's exactly how they wanted to do it at the beginning, which prevents them talking over each other more. And that's great because you know who you are and you know that you'll do it. So Tom and I just do it. We talk over each other all the time. It's sort of our shtick, and it's usually me talking over him, right? So that's the thing. But we got to the point where we podcast across the table from each other and we point to each other. But these are you have to find a way to make that happen because the dynamicism of the two of you together is really great. There's this like difference in perspective and viewpoint. There's also just sort of like more fun and playfulness that goes on with having the two of you together. So to lose that because technically it feels complicated or cumbersome, you don't want to do that because I think it's part of what's making your show bingeable and great.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Yes. From your perspective, what do you think has really been the unique thing that's gotten you through 50 episodes and started to draw an audience for you?
We really believe in the mission of telling these courageous stories. And we're definitely not afraid, again, right, to have courageous conversation, courageous dialogue about things that a lot of people in wellness might not necessarily want to talk about, right? Like privilege. The wellness space is very white. That's just the way it is. So we bring up these topics with our diverse group of guests. And of course, we don't feel like we're going to solve all these issues on one podcast episode, but we do believe it's really important to talk about it, to share it, and to be voices and encourage, our audience to be the force and to do good in this world.
Did you set out to do that at the beginning, or did it sort of develop over time?
I'm going to say a little bit of both. We set out to tell the stories, right, in the most basic way. But as we started to interview people and as we became more entrenched in sort of this Los Angeles wellness community, certain things became very apparent to us pretty quickly. And we decided that we wanted to use the platform to maybe make small changes, or at least, if not make changes, at least bring awareness to some of the issues that are just not really talked about. Wellness is such a big word, right? We believe that it should be accessible to everybody, that everybody should have a right to have some sort of practice for themselves, and that shouldn't cost a certain amount of money, or you shouldn't have to look a certain way to go to a certain class or whatever that may be. So that became a more apparent theme the more entrenched we became in the communities.
Kind of like the antidote to what was going on out there.
Exactly. As our awareness grew, we tried to incorporate it more into the conversations that we've had.
Yeah. This is interesting. So, because we have a new podcaster starting up that I definitely want to introduce you to, but we've had similar conversations around the fact that there are so many podcasters and video casters and social media that just make it way more complicated than it needs to be as well. And you guys kind of keep it simple.
Yeah, we try. We try. Yeah.
Yeah. And even from like a technical perspective, we try to keep it simple too. That's something we've learned. Like we want to be mobile. We want to be able to we've refined our long distance stuff, which is never the same as being in the room with someone. But when we are in the room with someone as well, we want to keep it simple. We want to be able to go to them if that's possible. And so we've tried to keep our setup simple yet refined.
Yeah. Professional, right? So what advice do you have for someone who wants to start out podcasting?
We've talked a lot about this and she might want to elaborate on it as well. But I think, just do it. But I think we kind of touched on this already, but I think it honestly worked to our advantage. We definitely had passion, we had mission, and we did our due diligence in terms of what we needed to figure out technically and all of that not so fun behind the scenes stuff. We definitely did that. But in terms of getting it out there, and we just did it. We're like, we're going to tell these stories because we believe in them so much and see where that goes. And I think sometimes nothing is ever going to be perfect. So if you wait until something is perfect, you're going to be waiting forever, or you're always going to be so upset with whatever product you eventually put out there. So you have nothing to lose by just doing it.
Yeah. And as far as like, if you're starting out with a podcast, because it is pretty trendy and it's pretty easy to start one, right? Like all you need is a microphone and a computer. But I think people don't realize how much consistent work it is. And that's something I'd like to bring awareness to, because people think, we're friends. And even our friends are like, what do you guys do when you're together? And it's like, they don't understand the time commitment that goes into it. I mean, you have editing, and we do very minor edits, but we have to edit, you have to do research, you have to do reach out, you have to do communications. And with us, because we're a guest-based podcast, we do a lot of correspondence with publicists and individuals. And it's just a big time commitment.
It absolutely is. I'm so glad you mentioned that.
And I think in the world of sort of like social media influencers these days, it can seem like glossy for people to have a brand or whatever. And we definitely started out as podcast hosts. We didn't start out as social media influencers, and we're not. So let's just make that clear. But it's not all shiny, that like what you see on the outside. It takes a lot of hard work and a lot of preparation. And I just don't expect that it's like going to just flow. You have to keep the flow.
You mentioned before the number of podcasters. So there's a lot of podcasts out there. There's over 700,000 podcasts out there, but there's only 140,000 active ones, which says to me, that's exactly because they got into it and they didn't realize what they were getting themselves into.
Absolutely. I think too, something Aly and I always go back to is like, what is your why? I think in everything in life, like, what is your why? Why are you starting a podcast? Why do you want to put this message out into the world? Why do you do anything that you do? Because when it gets hard or when you're growing your listenership and it's like every day, especially in the beginning is a grind. And it's like, what is that why?
Especially when they're not coming back and talking to you, right?
Exactly. I think it's so funny. I remember when Aly and I first started getting messages and DMs from listeners, and we would always be like, do you know this person? Do you know that? And we'd be like, no.
You're like, it's a real listener. It's not my mom.
It is hard. And I think that's part of it. It's like you see the numbers, you see the map. We have listeners all over the world, which is so incredible, but you don't interact, right? Like they're just on a web page until they're not, right? Until they start corresponding with you. So again, I really believe it's that why and that mission and purpose that keeps you going.
Well, let's talk about some of those best lessons you've learned so far. And so I've got the best ways to. So we're going to go over the 5 things, the best ways to. The best ways to book great guests.
Great question. I would say 1, as far ahead of time as you can, plan. And we always like to be we've learned this the hard way too, but a certain sort of amount of time out so that we know that there was always going to be a great episode to release every week, right? But ask. Yeah. I think that was sort of mind-blowing to us. We've gotten some incredible guests who are even at the tops of their field now. We have people with regular stories, but we also have like experts come on now and they have their stories. Like, why did they become an expert in the X field in medicine or whatever? So what really blew my mind in the beginning is we just started asking people we didn't know. And people often say yes. But if you don't ask, the answer is no.
Yeah. And I also think back to that planning concept. I think some of the lessons, right, that you're talking about is because we do solo episodes every few months, but we are guests, we interview people, right? So early on, if someone would cancel, we would be like, what are we going to do? It would be such a scary experience. And so that was definitely a learning process to, like Aly said, to always be booking so that isn't a problem. But we do a lot of research. And I think it helps, Aly and I both have entertainment backgrounds. So we both have experience in this world, but even if it wasn't podcasting and just reach out, but just ask and plan and do great research.
I love that. Okay. So some of the best ways to increase listeners.
Press. And press comes in all forms, right? So it might be podcasts, doing other podcasts. We do a lot of swaps, which is really fun for us because it's a way we get great guests and they have interest in sharing our story. And we get to co-engage each other's communities, right? So that's sort of the best way to get new listeners is constantly being engaging in new communities, especially if there's crossover with yours and sharing platforms. We don't look at it as like a competitive thing. Other wellness podcasts, like we have something to offer and they have something to offer and we have something to offer each other's audiences. And so we often get requests or ask people to do swaps with us and that really works.
Yeah, I also think too, again, like a lot of times, especially because we're so guest specific, right? You would think if someone had a certain number of followers that would translate to a certain amount of listens, but that is just not the case. So some of our actually unbelievably popular episodes, we did an episode on death and grief, right? Wellness and death and grief and healing through that process. And she is not an influencer. She actually went to high school with Aly. They're best friends. And that episode did unbelievable, right? So I think too, like, again, not to sound like a broken record, but why are you doing what you're doing? What is the mission behind what you're doing? And I think for us, telling these courageous stories and topics, like no one really wants to talk about death. It's hard for me to deal with. It's something that I'm not 100% comfortable in, but our audience really responded to it. They shared it, they posted about it and did really well for us.
The stories that resonate really translate into more listeners. I like that. That's really great. So you guys are producing this all DIY. You're doing it yourself. So what are some ways that you found? You said you don't do a lot of heavy edits. So how do you produce it in a professional way so you don't have to do a lot of work?
So we're actually very fortunate. We got lucky that my husband actually produces podcasts and edits podcasts, but we don't pay my husband and he works full time. So he has a lot of different clients and a lot of different jobs. So he's helped us, but we've still gone through like 5 phases of microphones.
You know what? You guys are using the one I recommend. And we did a significant study on all the microphones, and you're still back to the ones that we recommend because it actually creates the least amount of edits.
Yep, exactly. So he did help us, especially in the beginning, with getting like sound and he still does light edits for us. So we can't take full credit for that because we do have his guidance and his help. But at the same time, we have to re-listen and timestamp for him. We send him all of the manual edits and then he just technically does it. So the time aspect we are still doing on our own, but yeah, he does physically go in there and cut for us.
There you go. I love it. Encouraging engagement. So you were saying it took a while for people to start talking to you. About how long did it take? And then what did you do to encourage it to happen more?
It was honestly about like 8 to 10 months. I think it started around 6, but I'd say like a lot of the engagement happened about like 10 months in, I want to say, is when it started really taking off.
So were you about like 25 episodes in, somewhere around 25? Yeah. It's a magic number and no one really realizes that there's something about the magic of hitting about 25 where people then start talking to you. And I don't know why it is, but it happens for my shows that release 25 at the beginning, they get engagement right away. And the ones that do 25 over time, same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So it took like about like to the halfway point, but yeah. And how we encourage it. I mean, Aly and I, we love talking to people who email us and DM us and write to us. Like we will talk to you and answer your questions and like be your best friend. We're pretty friendly.
Yeah. And we appreciate it too. So we love to have a little chat with someone who said, I love this episode or is sharing this episode because it meant something. We've even had doctors. We did an episode on breast cancer and we've had our guest physicians and stuff asking, is it okay for them to share it with their other patients so that they could benefit from it, from the conversation? And that really has meant a lot to us. So we take that seriously. It means a lot to us. As we get busier, we are a little bit slower sometimes with responses as far as like we do get a lot of reach out to be on the show. But even that, we try to respond to everybody because we really appreciate anybody who's interested.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Best ways to monetize it. You guys have ads.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think for us, because we started as a podcast, so we didn't start as an Instagram. The Instagram came next. A lot of people, right? They have a platform and then they start a podcast. For us, we did it kind of the opposite way. We were a podcast. So for us, advertisements and sponsorships on the podcast episodes have been great. A lot of times who have become sponsors give us a trial code and see how it does. And if they do well, and then they want to sponsor us.
So prove your conversion.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times too, we're like micro influencers, but we definitely have a very engaged community and we would never, ever be it a sponsorship or just a free code. It's always something that we believe in and would take ourselves and recommend to our family and friends. So I think the integrity behind sponsorship is very, very important.
And just a little pro tip on what they're doing there. So I heard one of your episodes where you were advertising for the mushroom coffee. I forget what it's called.
Four Sigmatic.
That's right. And so I don't like the idea of mushrooms in my coffee, but one of you, I don't know which one of you it was, who said, I don't like mushrooms and I still like this coffee. And so that like resonated with me. I'd be like, I'd give it a try then. So having that personal touch is a really great way to produce ads.
And I think honestly, and this is obviously for other podcasters, I think as we've started to work with some brands, that's what they want because they understand that people also listen to the show. Yes, oftentimes we're very guest specific, but we've learned even through our own stats on the back end that people start to connect with the hosts too and to not take that lightly. And so even with working with brands, they want you to put the copy into your own voice, into your own words. They want you to create content that is specific to us because I'm sure they have other podcasts or other platforms that they have that reach an entirely different group of people, but specific to that platform. And so they want ours to be from our voices.
Right. They want it to touch the people that are there for you. So have you gotten sort of a higher level of, I'm going to call it authority? Have you become more influential? How has it impacted what you were doing? Or I think you're going to be speaking somewhere. I think that's how we met, right?
Yeah, it's totally completely changed our lives in the last year. Aly and I both actually went back to school. We're about to be certified holistic nutrition health coaches from the Institute of Integrative Nutrition. We do host and moderate panels. We speak. So it has evolved into much more than just a podcast. But also, I think, again, like this mission for our stories, I think is really bled into now. Like we really feel like this is our life's mission.
And it's expanding sort of our ideas for the next step for what type of work we could do because of this platform.
Wonderful. Yeah. So future things on your list, book.
You know, what's funny? We always say, I'm just going to put it out there. We have such amazing guests, right? And we've actually released more than 50 at this point, and there's no end in sight. So we thought that someday it would be really fun to do a coffee table book featuring different stories of and beautiful art, like featuring all of the guests, right?
Yeah. The select ones, the ones that really resonated.
Yeah. Select stories that are just such beautiful things and beautiful people and such like diverse group of voices. And we would love to have like a beautiful sort of coffee table book.
Yeah, I also think we're definitely also open and would love to have some sort of like media company as well to continue empowering other people. We're also open to like video and digital content as well, our interviews and just working with people.
Wonderful. Now, you mentioned before that one of the best way to get a great guest is to ask. So I always like to ask this towards the end is like, who's your big ask? Who's the big get that you haven't been able to reach? Find their PR firm, whatever that is. Who would you really like to have on the show that you haven't gotten?
This is like dream one day, but like Michelle Obama for me. That's like way out there.
She's at the top of the list so far.
Yes, Oprah, Michelle Obama, definitely. But I think what's amazing is we're now, since one of the lessons we learned early on is to always plan. We're pretty booked right towards the end of the year, even though we haven't released it at this point. So actually, we can't say who, but a lot of those like big guests that we've wanted when we started a year ago, they're going to be coming on. So it's again, just ask and you never doubt yourself just because you're a micro influencer. But yeah, I mean, for me, I don't know, Aly, who you think, but like Michelle Obama or Oprah. I love Super Soul Sunday. I have to say, as Erica said, like, oh, what are these big names that you don't have like the contact to? And it's like, those people who are on our list, we do now. And like, that's so exciting. For me, I have like a ton of people sort of in the medical world that I really love and other podcasters, but we also are in touch a little bit with some of these people too. So it's like, I don't know that they would be like big names that people would know of other than me if you're just like a real nerd. I just think it's so exciting that I'm like, oh, the people that were on like our list as like far reaches we're now in contact with. And I will say that's something Aly and I are both really good about. I don't know if it's because we have this shared Buddhist practice, that is how we actually met, but we write intentions, we write goals, we constantly, especially in the beginning, but we do check-ins of like, what are our goals for the next 6 months? What are our goals for the next year? What is our big vision, right? So these are things that we've talked about since pretty much right after we started and it started like moving. We were like, what do we want to do? What do we want to see? So even towards the end of the year, some of these quote dream guests that we've now booked and are in contact with, they were on our list a year ago. So it's not like it just magically happened.
It's always changing. That's right. I love it. Well, great. Well, do you have any last pieces of advice for someone who wants to get started?
I would say it's easy to start. It's harder to continue. So just keep that in mind that when obstacles come up, like they inevitably will. And just to keep that in mind and not necessarily get discouraged by setbacks, but like it's not a sprint, it's a marathon.
Yeah.
And just to sort of like have that in the back of your head, like, and even small growth is growth.
Yeah. Something Aly and I always say too is like forward is forward. We're constantly like forward is forward, even if it's small forward. But I also think, you know, you mentioned too, like we are great friends and we have this beautiful friendship. But I do think it helped that we were friends, but we weren't best friends. We weren't like, it wasn't like we were like tied at the hip. And I almost think that worked to our advantage because we knew each other, we liked each other, but it really also established a very important business partnership and working relationship. And so we have so much fun. We, you know, are closer than ever. But again, I think the foundation of this relationship really grew because of the podcast. And that is really, I think, important. So yeah, like you don't have to work with your best friend, but if you are, just know the dynamics are going to change because you're now married to each other.
Yeah, yes, you are. Absolutely. Or you podcast with the person you're actually married to, which is what I've done. So anyway, well, I love it. So Courageous Wellness, when do you put out your new episodes each week?
Every Wednesday. So check in Wellness Wednesdays.
Wellness Wednesdays. I love it. So Wellness Wednesdays on Courageous Wellness Podcast. Aly French, Erica Stein, thank you so much for being on. I really appreciate it. and excited to see you. I think we're going to see each other at the She Podcast event.
Potentially.
Potentially. Okay, well, good. I hope we do. That would be awesome. And I just want everyone to know that I am bringing you brand new podcasters every single week, trying to get more co-hosts coming on, just like Aly and Erica here, because I think that's a good dynamic to throw in as well, giving you tips, great tips on all the top things that they're doing, all the ways that they're growing, and all the struggles that they've been through, because we want to know those as well, because we want you guys to keep going. We want to grow a greater group of podcasters out there who are in it for the long haul, who are in it for their listeners, who are in it for what's doing right by their businesses and by their own personal whys and growths, as was brought up today. So I thank you all for listening to the Center of Influence on Feed Your Brand. And if you have anyone who you'd like to bring forward to us, or you would like to be featured on it, you can always go to feedyourbrand.co and leave us a message. And you will also be able to get in touch with Aly and Erica straight through the podcast blog post on feedyourbrand.co. So thanks everyone for listening. This is Tracy Hazard, and I'll be back next time with a new podcast influencer.
You've been listening to the Binge Factor podcast. For more information on podcasting and videocasting success tips and tactics, please go to thebingefactor.com. And be sure to listen to our other show for podcasters called Feed Your Brand. If you'd like to be interviewed on this show, as well as featured in Tracy's column, please go to thebingefactor.com/guest and apply.